Hello guys, and welcome to the next video. Today we will be taking another look at my collection, and as you can see it will be Pharaos Servant. Of course, as with all the other sets that I showed you so far, the first row in the binder is always the first edition master set, and then we have the two other master sets which are a mix of first edition cards and unlimited cards. Yeah, so Pharaos Servant was a pretty cool set when it came out. It contained a lot of really strong cards that were quickly limited to one, and that were really good from the effect. So yeah, let's go straight ahead and jump into it. So the first card is the Jinso, which is the favorite card of a lot of people. I also really love this card. Of course, it was very strong back in the day. When you summon it, first of all, it's a 6-star monster, so it only requires 1 tribute. And then it has the 2400 attack, which is really strong. And of course, it disables all the trap cards. And back in the day, there were a lot of trap cards that were played, so that effect was also very, very strong. Like you had the Mirror Force, the Bottomless Trap Hole, or even the Magic Cylinder, and all of these cards did not work anymore if you summoned Jinso. So that guy won a lot of games back in the day. Of course, he was very quickly limited to 1, so you cannot play 3 of this guy. Then next we have some vanilla monsters, again with all the old sets. Even Pharaos Servant still contained these. Nobody really played these because they're just bad. But yeah, they had to put some in to make the set bigger, I guess. Next page we have the Parasite, which is a card from the enemy. Of course, it has one of the weirdest effects. Like if it gets flipped face up, then you put it upside down in the opponent's deck and shuffle the deck. And that's really weird because if you put a card upside down in a deck and shuffle it, you can see where the card is. So that's like really pointless. Like the last person who shuffles the deck can decide where the card ends up. So I wouldn't play that guy. And we have more enemy cards over here. The 7 completed is the card that Bandit Keith pulled out of his sleeve to make his machine type stronger. Of course, you don't want to play this card in real life because you can just play Malevolent Nuzzler, which does the same but for any type and not just machine monsters. Then we have the Light Force Sword. That was a card that YuGiOh used. I think it was against the Rare Hunter, so he cannot summon Exodia. He activated the sword, so 1 piece got removed from play for like 3 turns or something. And then the next card, the Chain Destruction, is actually the card that he comboed the Light Force Sword with. When the Rare Hunter summoned a piece of Exodia, YuGiOh just activated the Chain Destruction. And if you know the effect of that card, it removes all copies of a monster from the deck or hand of the owner of the monster from play. So that guy summoned 1 piece of Exodia and YuGiOh used the Chain Destruction, so all the other pieces got removed from the deck and then he couldn't summon Exodia. But yeah, in real life, these cards were not really good, even though that one was ultra rare. It would have been good if it had destroyed the monster that was summoned, but it doesn't, so it's not really that good. You could put it in your side deck, but that's it. Next we have Time Seal. Wasn't really a card that got played too much, but it enabled some like infinite loops where you prevented your opponent from drawing. I think it was Time Seal, Mask of Darkness, and Tsukuyomi. You would just activate the Time Seal, your opponent cannot draw. And in the next turn you would flip up the Mask of Darkness, get your Time Seal back, set it, and then summon Tsukuyomi, flip the mask back face down, and then basically you got a Time Seal every round and your opponent cannot draw anymore. I'm not sure, I think the card was banned, or some other card of the combo was banned. I think it was the Time Seal that was banned. Yeah, but anyway, next card is the Grave Robber, another anime card that was played by Joey, and again in real life it's not a really good card. You can take for 1 turn a spell card from your opponent's graveyard and use it like it's yours, but if you use it you have to pay 2000, and 2000 life points back in the day was a little too much, and you never really knew what spell cards your opponent was playing, and you never knew if he actually had a good spell card in his deck, so you wouldn't want to play this card. Yeah, and as you can see there are a lot of trap cards in this set. It's almost all traps. A lot of these are pointless and I don't really know their effect, so we will just talk about those of which I do know the effect. I know this one gives you life points, but it's a really minor effect. So down here we have the Dust Tornado. This was a really good card back in the day. When Mystical Space Typhoon got limited to 1, you would always play Dust Tornado. If you were up against a stall deck that was using Gravity Bind or something like that, you wanted something to destroy the spell trap cards. So even if you didn't play Dust Tornado in your main deck, you would always put at least 2 or 3 in your side deck to side them in. And I was always a person who played at least 1 Dust Tornado in the main deck, because for me 1 Mystical Space Typhoon was not enough. Then we have the Call of the Haunted, which is one of the best special summon from your graveyard cards that was in the game for a long time. It got limited to 1 very early on, and I think even today it gets still played sometimes. It's just like a Monster Reborn, but it only counts through your graveyard, and since it's a trap card, you can activate it in your opponent's battle phase or end phase or whatever. And for example, you can pull off some combos, like if your opponent attacks you directly, you can activate it and get back a Sangan, or you can get a Sangan to tribute it, or if your opponent targets it with like a Heavy Storm or Mystical Space Typhoon, you can activate it and get back Sangan to trigger the effect. Yeah, so on the next page there are a lot of trap cards. Again, all of these, I don't really know what they do, but they're not really good. The only one I remember is that one that's in the Pegasus starter deck. If a monster attacks you, you can activate this card and you increase your life points by the attack value of the monster. Then down here we have Mirror Wall, another enemy card. It's actually not too bad in the real game. If you saw the duel of Pharaos Servant versus Labyrinth of Nightmare, it helped me sometimes. It's basically good because the coast is only the next turn and you don't have to pay for it. So you can activate the card, prevent an opponent's attack. Most likely his monster will be destroyed and he takes some damage. And in your standby phase you just put the card into the graveyard if you don't want to pay. And if you actually end up paying, you have the option to keep the card to like save you one more round or something. So it's quite good. Yeah, these cards are mostly cards again with pretty bad effects that you don't want to play. Down here we have two rare cards. One says if your opponent draws outside of his draw phase, you can also draw 2 cards. And down here this says if you discard a card, your opponent has to discard a card as well. Basically these cards are not too bad, but they're dependent on your opponent's deck. And if he doesn't draw any cards outside of his draw phase or doesn't make you discard, then these cards don't really work. So you don't want to play these. Yeah, up here we have the DNA Surgery. Back in the day it was not a card that was played a lot. There were some Naishi decks that would maybe play it. But later on, I guess when more archetypes came out and more type support, this card got really strong. And it's actually a more valuable common card from this set. Down here we have Backup Soldier. Again, I don't think super rare is a good rarity for this card. It should have been rare or common because it doesn't have a lot of uses. At least back in the day it didn't. It basically was just for Exodia decks to get some normal monsters back from the graveyard. If one of the parts of Exodia got discarded for some reason, then you would get it back with Backup Soldier, but that's about it. Over here we have the Ceasefire. This card was limited to 1 early on because it has a very high damage potential. It does 500 points of damage for each effect monster that's on the field. So that's a potential of 5,000 damage. So using 2 of these could potentially kill your opponent. So that's probably the reason why they're limited to 1. But it also negates all the flip effects of face down monsters. So they get flip face up and the effect gets disabled. So that's also pretty cool. But still, not a lot of people played this card back then. Maybe in the side deck, if your opponent played a lot of flip monsters, then you put it in. But generally, there were better cards. Of course, in the burn deck, it was a really good card. The next page, we have the Magical Heads, another card from the anime. Again, in real life, it's not really good. Like, you have to get 2 spell trap cards from your deck and set them on the field together with 1 monster, and then your opponent has to guess which card your monster is. And I don't know, it's just not really good. And we have the Nobleman of Crossout. That's one of the best cards from the set. Got played for a long time. You just remove 1 face down monster from play, and then all the copies of the monster, if it's a flip monster, get also removed from play that are in either player's deck. So it always kind of sucked if you hit a Magician of Faith and you had to remove your own Magician of Faith. But that was always a risk you was taken when playing this card. But other than that, it's really awesome to just get rid of like a Cyber Char or Morphing Char or something. Then this guy down here is basically the same, but for spell and trap cards. But this guy did not really get played because instead of playing this guy, you can also just play the Mystical Space Typhoon or Dust Tornado, and they're a little better in my opinion. Yeah, next page, up here we have the Premature Burial. Of course, with the Call of the Haunted, another very strong Rebirth card that can get a monster back from your graveyard. So this is a spell card. It's basically the same effect as Call of the Haunted, just that you can activate it in your turn. And as a drawback, you have to pay 800 life points. I mean, that's not too much, but still the card got limited to 1 as well, because reviving from the graveyard is always very strong. Yeah, so then down here, this is an interesting card, Prohibition. When you activate this card, you say 1 other card's name, and this card you called out cannot be used anymore during your duel. So that was always a card you could put in your side deck. I mean, back in the day, a lot of people were not playing any archetypes or anything, so that card was kind of pointless. But later on, when all the archetypes came out that were playing for a specific boss monster or that needed a specific field card, then you would just play Prohibition and ban the monster or the card they relied on, and then the deck was pretty much useless. So that's always a good side deck option. And up here is the Morphing Char. As with all the other chars, this card is just very overpowered. It resets the whole field, all the monsters get shuffled back in the deck, and then all players draw cards until they draw the same number of monsters, and then they summon all the monsters, and all other cards get discarded to the graveyard. It has potential to like destroy your whole deck if you don't draw a monster, so I did not like playing that card a lot. I would rather play the Cyber Char. Here we have more vanilla monsters, and more vanilla monsters. These two actually have 1700 attack for 4 stars. I guess that was decent back in the day. And as kids we would play these because we didn't have a lot of copies of the 1800s that were out back in the day. So we would play these two. They weren't too bad. Yeah, then up here's the Harpies Brothers. That's one of the 1800 monsters. So this guy is even a little better. I think he was renamed to Sky Scout later on. So he's not part of the Harpies team deck anymore. And we have Buster Platter, very, very cool card in my opinion. It's also from the anime, of course. YuGiOh was playing it. In real life you wouldn't use it because 2 tributes for only 2600 attack was not too good, and it doesn't have a game-breaking effect or anything. It gets, I think, 500 points of attack for every dragon your opponent controls and has in the graveyard, so that's not really useful. You didn't want to play this guy. And we have the Mishi Sword. That was a decent card when it came out, and it got actually played. If one of your monsters gets destroyed, you can activate this card and destroy an opponent monster. So that's a 1-for-1 exchange, and before like Sakuretsu Armor and similar cards came out, you would always play this card because it was a reliable monster removal for your opponent. Over here there's more traps that I don't know what they're doing, so they're probably not that good. Up here, Solemn Wishes. That was a card I always played as a kid because getting like 3 life points every single turn seemed really overpowered. Of course the card is not really good, but duels would last like really long if you played against your friend and you both had 2 or 3 Solemn Wishes on the field and you did not really attack, and after some time you were at like 15,000 life points and the duel would just end because like the decks ran out or something. Yeah, down here's the Bubonic Vermin, one of the first, what do you call these, swarm monsters. If this guy gets flipped face up you can summon another one, and you can basically use that to thin out your deck in like old Exodia decks or something. You would use this guy. We have more vanilla monsters and some spell cards over here. We have the Cold Wave. Back in the day nobody was playing this card, and I think nobody really got the potential of it, and later on everybody was playing it and it even got banned. But I guess that's also caused by the meta game that was introduced later on. Like back in the day you would summon 1 monster and attack with that monster and that's it. And later on you would summon like 3 or 4 monsters that had a total of like 10,000 attack, and then you just activate the Cold Wave and attack with all these monsters, and then it's good game for your opponent. Back in the day that wasn't the case, so Cold Wave was not really that strong and nobody really played it. But yeah, as I said, later on it got banned because it was a little too strong when you can summon a lot of monsters. We have the Fairy Meteor Crash, the first card that gave your monsters piercing damage, but since it didn't give any additional effect like the Big Bang Shot, which also gives you I think 400 attack, this card got not really played a lot. Just piercing is not good enough. We have the Limiter Removal, a pretty cool card. It doubles the attack of all your machine type monsters and they get destroyed in the end phase, so there was a lot of 1-turn kill potential with this card. And I think, for example, with Cyber Dragons it's really strong. If you play like Cyber End Dragon and activate Limiter Removal, you have an 8000 attack monster that does piercing damage, so you can pull off some 1-turn kills with it. Yeah, over here I think these are some more cards that were used in the anime but are not really good. The Magic Train is another mentionable card. If your opponent activates a magic card, then you can chain this card and either the magic card gets negated or your opponent discards another magic card. With all the magic cards that were running around back in the day, before the first ban list came out, this card was actually not too bad. Negating magic cards was actually always good. Like if your opponent activates Pot of Greed or Change of Heart or Monster Reborn or something, you can chain this guy and he has to decide if he doesn't use the effect of the card he just used or gets rid of another very good magic card. So it was always a thing to play. Here we have the Gravity Bind, one of the first stall cards after the Swords of Revealing Light. No monster with level 4 or higher can attack anymore. As I mentioned before in another video, I was playing a burn deck and I always use this card 3 times, as you can imagine. I would activate this card and then just do whatever burn deck does. I know it's a very annoying deck to play against and people don't like it. I later on switched to a like normal beatdown deck. And over here we have the Legendary Fisherman, very iconic card from the enemy. A lot of people like it. I personally don't really like it. I always find it a little too weak with only 1850 attack. But the effect is kind of cool. Like, you can summon it from your hand with the Legendary Ocean because it doesn't require tribute. But once it's on the field, then it's unaffected by magic cards. So if you, for example, use it with what's it called, level limit area B, where all the 4-star monsters get turned to defense, this guy stays in attack and can still attack. And with the Legendary Ocean, it gets an attack boost, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, next page, we have a lot of pointless monsters that nobody really played, I guess. The effects of those are really bad. Down here we have the 1000 Eyes Idol, which is one of the short printed cards in the set. I think from the box we opened, we only pulled one. Of course, you need that one for the 1000 Eyes Restrict Fusion, which I believe is on the next page. Yeah, so right here we have the 1000 Eyes Restrict. That's one of my favorite cards from the set. I really like the artwork and the effect and everything about this card. It's very well designed in my opinion. Of course, when it came out it was really hard to summon it, but later on when the Metamorphosis came out it was really easy with the Scapegoat and stuff. So a lot of people played this guy in a side deck, and I think it was also limited to 1 and maybe even banned for some time. I'm not sure about that. But I really like it and I like how it's played in the GOAT format. And then over here we have the Hayabusa Knight, probably the first monster that could attack 2 times during the same battle phase. But with only 1000 attack he was really weak, so you would have to boost him up. And even with the Axe of Despair he's only at like 2000 and cannot beat 2000 defense monsters, so that guy was not played that much. Another very strong card back in the day is down here, the 4-star Ladybug of Doom. Most people back then just played the strongest monsters in their deck, and so they played mostly 4-star monsters with 1800 or 1900 attack. So if you played 4-star Ladybug of Doom, you could mostly out their whole field, except maybe 1 or 2 tribute monsters they were playing. So that was pretty good. Yeah, next page we have some more vanilla monsters. Down here the Mad Sword Beast. That's the first monster that has the piercing effect by itself without any additional cards. It only has 1400 attack, but if you equipped it with like an Axe of Despair, it already had like 2400, and that's pretty strong with piercing effect, but especially back in the day when no Sakuretsu armor or similar cards existed. I remember my friend always used it with the Axe of Despair and he beat me a lot with it. And down here we have the Goblin Attack Force, the strongest 4-star monster for a very long time. It has 2300, but of course if you attack with it, it gets turned to defense, of which it has 0, and then you cannot turn it back to attack during your next turn. So it most likely is like a one-shot cannon. You attack once with it, like for a lot of direct damage or to get rid of a strong monster or something, and then it gets turned to defense and your opponent just kills it. But it's still decent. If you play the warrior deck and use the reinforcements of the army, you could always search out that guy, so that was something. And up here there's a 4-star with 2000 defense that I was playing as a kid. It's the Island Turtle. Some more very low level monsters here. Down here there's the Fiend Mega Cyber. It has a pretty cool effect. It's similar to Cyber Dragon. If your opponent controls 2 more monsters than you do, you can special summon this guy from your hand. And I think this card was a little underrated back in the day. Like, not really many people played it, but it's pretty strong if you think about it. It's 2200 attack and you can special summon it. But I guess it's harder to pull off than the Cyber Dragon because your opponent has to have 2 monsters more. And if he has 2 monsters more, you've probably already taken a lot of direct attacks with those. But I still think people should have played this card more. And we go to the last page. Up here we have the Gearfried the Iron Knight, which is the second 1800 4-star monsters in the set. Of course it has the effect that every equip spell card that you equip it with gets destroyed immediately. So there were a lot of infinite loops with this card and the Butterfly Dagger Elma. Like, you would play out Gearfried, equip it with Elma, and Elma gets destroyed immediately. And then the effect of Elma says if it gets sent to the graveyard, you can return it back to your hand. And so basically that was an infinite loop, and then you put in any other card that does something when you activate a spell card, or when a card gets sent to the graveyard or something, and you can do a lot of stuff with that. So the Butterfly Dagger was banned later on because of that. And here's the Insect Barrier. That's a pretty useless card itself, but you can combo it with the DNA operation. So you turn all your opponent's monsters to insects, and then they cannot attack anymore if you activate the Insect Barrier. Down here we have the Beast of Talva, which is one of the ultra rares of the set. I never really understood why this card is ultra rare, because I mean, it's a 6-star monster and has 2400 attack, so that was probably pretty strong, but there was already the Summoned Skull, and in Labyrinth of Nightmare, which is the next set, there was the Amphibian Beast, which only was rare, so I really think this guy should have not been ultra rare. I think super rare or even just rare would have fitted it more. I also don't think I saw this guy in the anime, so I don't really know why they gave it such a high rarity. And the last card, of course, one of the strongest cards to ever be made, is the Imperial Order. You could just activate it and it would negate all magic cards, so you can even chain it to magic cards. If your opponent uses Pot of Greed, you chain the Imperial Order and the Pot of Greed gets negated. And then your opponent has a lot of trouble to get rid of this card, because most of the cards that destroy spell trap cards are magic cards themselves. So the only way to get rid of Imperial Order was to either chain a Mystical Space Typhoon to its activation, or use a Dust Tornado. And that's pretty much about it, I guess, back in the day. And as I mentioned before, there were a lot of strong spell cards around, and many people played like 15 spell cards and only 5 trap cards in their deck or something, so Imperial Order just disabled all of these, and that was just way too powerful. I was playing a lot of duels with my friend where we went through old sets and built decks from them, and I won a lot of these simply because I drew Imperial Order and he couldn't use any more spell cards. It's just ridiculous strong, especially because you can wait till you draw your own good spell cards and then the next turn in your standby phase not pay the 700 life points, and then it gets destroyed, and then you can use all your spell cards at once, and that's just ridiculous. Of course, this card was errataed recently, so I think now you have to pay the life points, so you cannot choose anymore if you destroy this card or not, and you have to pay it during each standby phase, so during your own standby phase and during your opponent's standby phase. So it's pretty expensive and doesn't give you the advantage anymore that you can use your own spell cards whenever you want. But yeah guys, that's it for the set. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when we take a look at Labyrinth of Nightmare.